Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce Jack Lew, managing partner at Lindsay Goldberg and a former Treasury Secretary of the United States. We're here to talk about everything, the global outlook to the outlook for PE. Jack, thanks so much for being here today.
Wilson?
I think I'd like want to kick off really by asking what you make of the Pfizer vaccine news and the global outlook for 2021 as a result.
Well, it's obviously good news that there are good results from the Pfizer trials. I am not a scientist, but I do take even the good news in perspective and hope that it's borne out as we go forward, and that there's the ability to produce it and distribute it at a pace that really gives us the ability to make progress in terms of fighting the virus. You know, I believe from the very beginning of COVID that the economic crisis was going to track how well we are able to deal with the health crisis. It was not a natural economic cycle. It was a health-driven cycle. And as we've seen a lot of ups and downs and, high hopes of a quick, immediate recovery, to some extent, common sense tells you that until we can get back to normal, until the sectors of the economy that are just not able to fully reopen, until we're out of the specter of parts of Europe being in shutdown and the United States being in varying degrees of shutdown, we can't get back to normal. And that's why even with the good GDP numbers, we're still 3 to 4% below where we were before. So we need to get our hands around the health crisis for the economy to get back on its feet in a sustainable way. I think we have to be somewhat, kind of keep our sense of what's possible in mind. Even if the vaccine works, it's not as if next week it will be distributed broadly enough to get back to normal. And even after the vaccine is distributed, the damage to the economy will have a tail, and it's going to take a while for full recovery. So I think we're looking ahead at a hard slog for the next year or two. And there's a lot of risk that if things don't work as well as they might, that could get worse, not better. I'm encouraged that there's a good result. I'm also encouraged that we're about to have a change of policy in the United States where we do some of the common sense things that give us the ability to get back and stay back at normal more quickly. But I think we have to be humble about the virus. It's in charge, and until we can really say it's under control, there's going to be risk in the economy.
And you brought me very neatly to my next question, which was going to be, what impact does President Biden have on the global economic outlook and then on the outlook for America specifically?
Well, I have to divide that into several parts because I think that the return to a normal language and approach from the United States, I think will be a calming influence on much of the world. It has been doing a favor to our adversaries and hurting our friends for us to become adversarial with partners who share our values. It has been against our interests to give our adversaries opportunities to step in places where we used to lead, but we've stepped back. So I think globally, there will be a sigh of relief that the United States is back in a more traditional role. I don't think we should kid ourselves and think that the experience of the last 4 years will pass overnight. I think there will be a lingering fear of, with a close election, is this clearly in our past? So while there will be relief that it is getting back into a place that permits more regularity, less chaos, more dependability on the United States, will it be fully back to the post-World War II order? I think no, for a few reasons. I think there's going to be that question. And I think the attitudes in the United States about what the right role for the U.S. is, particularly with some of our more tense relationships like China, is evolving, and it is not as different between sides as the harsh politics in the United States would suggest. I think coming home to the United States, there is much more likely going to be some response in terms of additional stimulus, some response in terms of a recovery package. But candidly, because of the division in the Congress, and even if the 2 Senate seats go to the Democrats in Georgia, it will be a very closely divided Congress that will put restraints on what a new Biden administration can do. So I think what you'll see is more than you would have if we had just slammed on the brakes, but less than we would have, and that means it'll be a slower immediate recovery. And I think we have to try to make the content of what we do get the most bang for the buck. And it's not fundamentally about pure size. It's about where the money goes. Does it stimulate demand in the places that it's most needed? And I have my own views as to where that is. But I'm hopeful that you'll see a package that's sized along the lines of the last discussions between the Trump administration and Speaker Pelosi, a little bigger, a little smaller, but that the design will be solid. I think the going forward, the likelihood of extreme changes is reduced by the lay of the land between Congress and the new administration. My hope is that paves a way to find some areas for constructive compromise, both because that produces the kind of lasting policy that you can depend on being there for an extended period of time, and because it's what I think the United States needs to start restoring some of the social fabric. I think the economy is fundamentally going to be dependent on the disease. When we get through the COVID crisis, it's going to be a lot easier to be fully optimistic about where we're going.
Now, you have experience of being in an administration with a divided Congress, and you also have experience, not as Treasury Secretary, but before that, of dealing with the sort of fallout from the financial crisis. Do you think there were lessons to be learned from the way in which the crisis was handled, and have they been learnt this time round?
Well, I thought at the beginning that some of the lessons had been learned. In the first few months, we saw bipartisan support for our response at a level that candidly is the reason we were able to bounce back as much as we have. It's because of the dramatic amount of public support for consumers, for businesses, for the financial system, that we've come back not all the way, but a significant amount of the way. That's going away now. And the support on a bipartisan basis seems to be going away. The mistake we made at the end of the financial crisis, and part of this mistake was because we didn't know until years later how deep the recession was and what was truly needed. But we now know what we learned over a period of 2 or 3 years. What we learned in 10 and 11 is that we took our foot off the gas too fast. We put too much burden on monetary authorities, not enough on fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is a much more effective way to get out of the deep hole of the recession faster. And monetary policy, as monetary policy makers are the first to say, can't do all the job. So, there's an exhaustion with spending. As somebody who presided over, 3 surpluses in the U.S. budget when I was budget director, and who brought the deficit from, almost 10% of GDP to 3% of GDP in subsequent roles, including Treasury, I understand why there's concern about spending. But it's a big mistake if we don't get the economy through this health-driven economic crisis in the strongest way possible. And that bipartisanship isn't there right now. Hopefully, when the rhetoric from the campaign comes down, I have not given up hope that even in the lame duck session, there's room to make progress, to show that there can. I know that you can work together across party lines if both sides are willing to compromise, are willing to do the things they can agree on, and get some concessions from the other side on the things that don't force them to violate their principles and move the country forward. And we did it in the 80s. We did it in the 90s. We didn't have the opportunity to do it very much in the Obama administration, candidly, because we had an absolute unwillingness on the part of Republicans in Congress. So the question will be, does Senator McConnell, Majority Leader McConnell, give the Senate a chance to vote on something that a majority could support on a bipartisan basis? I hope he will. That would be the right thing for the country. And I hope Democrats don't insist on forcing things to such an extreme that that can't come about. The optimist in me always believes that that's possible. I've been part of doing it in two very politically stressful environments. It can happen, but it only happens if leaders are willing to take some risk.
And do you see common ground? One area for disagreement has been the amount of money that's spent, and then another has been over what the money is spent on. Do you see some common ground potentially for the form that the stimulus could take?
I think at the week before the election, you saw Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi come awfully close. They didn't get all the way there, but if they could take that package and use it as a starting point, I think you can get there. There's no question, but the state and local governments are very hard hit. It will hurt the macroeconomy and cause a huge amount of family pain if we see layoffs and furloughs at a massive level at state and local government, particularly at a time when state and local governments are dealing with the crisis. I think if you look at households, we're seeing a startling number of households on the verge of eviction and hunger. That is not good for those families. It's not good for our social fabric. It's also not good for the economy, because that means that you're undermining the economics of important sectors, from housing to retail and food sales. Businesses, I'm very worried about Main Street businesses. They have not gotten the assistance that they need, particularly in lower income communities and communities of color. They're not going to make it through a second round of COVID if there isn't some more help. So I look at time being kind of the essence, because the period between now and February, March could be a period of extreme pain, and could deepen the damage and extend the tail of a recovery, which is why I'm hopeful that even in a lame duck session, there will be a coming together. The politics will not go away. The question is, can they overcome the politics?
And the politics could well get in the way, as you said, in President Biden's ability to implement a lot of his policy platform. Are there specific policies? I mean, I'm thinking, I suppose, of the corporate tax increase that you think will be stymied as a result of the political divisions in Congress?
I think that there's no question, but that if you look at the full proposals that President-elect Biden put out as a candidate, one has to say that the aspirations will have to be scaled back. I don't think that means they have to go away. I still think that there are places where there is room for agreement. You look at the corporate tax rate. I was Treasury Secretary for 4 years, was in negotiations for many of those years where the bid ask was between 25 and 28%. It was lowered to 21%. There is room for reasonable agreement in a way that will not undermine the profitability and the stability of American businesses. And will they be able to reach an agreement? It depends how hard they try. I think if you look at the excesses of the tax cut that were passed, some trimming around the edges, whether it's at the high end in terms of marginal tax rates or the excessively generous treatment given to unearned income, there's room. Will it get to the $4 trillion or whatever the number was that was in the original plan? No. But will it be enough to help finance a major investment in things people can agree on? I would hope so. I mean, there is a lot of agreement on some of the things we need to do in this country. First of all, I hope that there would be an agreement to pay for, to do an infrastructure investment as an emergency measure without paying for it. Because to recover from this recession, building our roads, building our high-speed internet, doing the things we need to do to have a foundation for sustained growth over the coming decades is something we ought to be able to agree on. Going beyond that, to deal with some of the problems that I think there's agreement on in terms of skills training, in terms of access to community college education, technical skills, I would hope we could agree on. we should start to pay for things once we're out of the recovery phase. We can't run the kinds of deficits that we're running during an emergency forever. And that's where the question comes in, how much of a willingness to pay for things will there be? I think the appetite for doing things will dictate how much of a willingness there is to find consensus on how to pay for them. And I hope that politicians hear from the American people that things like obstruction and gridlock will be punished. We've seen divided government lead to both, lead to obstruction and lead to consensus. I don't view this as an election where the American people said we want nothing. I think it was an election that said we want you to work together. And I hope that that message is heard in the corridors of Washington.
What do you make of the market reaction to the election and the likelihood of the Republicans keeping control of the Senate? Is it sort of cheering on the fact that? Go ahead.
No, please.
Have investors been cheering on the fact that President Biden won't be able to implement his entire policy platform?
Look, I think that there's a cheering on for stability. There's cheering on for return to normalcy. There's a relief that the full package won't be achieved and that the things in the middle they can live with. I think that that will be tempered if we have gridlock. My experience is that markets didn't like gridlock. They certainly didn't like threats of shutdowns and defaults. And I think that on the administration side, the way they approach the regulatory agenda will have a lot to do with it. The question of going back into the Paris Climate Accords is something that I don't think will scare markets. If you see kind of unbridled regulation, it will. I don't think you're going to see that. I think you were going to see that anyway. It's going to be a careful approach with an economy that is still fragile. And I think there's space to build confidence that it's being done in a sensible way. And I spend most of my time in private equity now. And, I think those markets tend to take a longer view. I mean, a firm like ours, where we work with low leverage and we have long-term holds and we work with management to build stronger businesses. Our question is, how do you look beyond the immediate crisis? How do you build something that's going to fill a need in the economy over the next 5 and 10 years? And I think that calming the volatility will increase the opportunity for us to do well in that space because it doesn't go up and down every hour and every day. The markets have never, to me, been necessarily a great indicator of the kind of long-term conditions. They reflect the emotions of the moment, the news of the moment, and I wouldn't overread the day-to-day market reactions.
We're nearly out of time, Jack, but one final question is, what's the impact of COVID been in the industry? I can imagine potential losses, but also opportunities for deal making.
So we've actually, in a world that's been very tumultuous, our portfolio has done very well. We've had one of our best quarters ever, partially because we invest in must-have businesses. So we were open as emergency necessary businesses, and our markets regained strength quickly. Partially because of an approach to management, we got control of it quickly. We could maintain liquidity. We didn't have to do dramatic reductions in our personnel. And we're looking at businesses that to a one are doing well. We have a pipeline because we deal with families and founders that's somewhat different than normal pipelines. And they're talking to us. We have many new transactions in the works, and it's almost been a tale of two cities. We look at an economy outside which causes great distress, but the performance of our portfolio and the opportunities that we're seeing have remained strong. I still believe that a strong economy is good for all businesses, so we will do better when the outside economy does well. But happily, what we've seen is that with good management and conservative approaches to both investing and managing, you can get through even a crisis like COVID.
Jack Lew, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you today. Stay well.